in his last interview with CBC, said the following, that the president was alarmed by the media, and he told Haikal, can you believe what's happening? Would they dare to write and speak the same way about Mubarak when Mubarak was there? And Haikal comment was, the president didn't realize that we had a revolution, and he came after a revolution that had removed all the taboos. My question is, for panelists, what do you think the impact of this animosity from the president to the media would have on the freedom of the press in Egypt?
I think we've seen right now that this animosity is being reproduced by the current regime towards the media, be it by the president or the administration by and large. The question is the relevance of this animosity and more than its effect. So, like we've said on the panel, we can no longer afford living in a context where media is silenced or media organizations are closed and journalists are jailed, because the moment an article is banned, it goes actually viral online. The moment a journalist is jailed, his question or his cause is championed everywhere. So the notion of animosity with the media by the ruling regime is no longer something that the ruling regime can afford. Actually, the only thing they can do is adapt to the fact of the diversity of the media, the multiplicities of voices out there, and forget about what are pretty much uncreative ways of taming the media, because this won't work, especially in the current context, like what we said before, where information is anything but centralized.
Just a couple of things to add. I think one of the problems, aside from the animosity, I don't think it's really animosity as much as it is sort of the inability to read the political situation that's going on in Egypt today. Because for the most part, I mean, think about this in the context of any political group or any political party that comes to power after a moment of rapture in a country, whether it's a revolution or a popular uprising or a coup d'etat or something along those lines. There's definitely the need to consolidate, not just consolidate power, but to commit the community at large, the population, the institutions of the state towards progress in some way. And I feel the Muslim Brotherhood and the president in particular they feel as though they haven't been given an opportunity, that the media jumped into the watchdog role instantly, without being given a chance to rebut. And it's sort of a reminder of how they've basically failed, the Muslim Brotherhood in general, have basically failed to use their own independent platforms to respond to this kind of critique. And maybe also sort of the reaction, not the reaction to Haikal specifically, but the reaction of both the presidency and the Muslim Brotherhood in general in dealing with the highly critical media. I mean, for the most part, they seem to have decided to give exclusive access to whether it's Gzira Mubashir Masr or their platforms, Masr 25, as well as the state programming, more so than some of the other competitors. I think, if anything, they should try to reach across the aisle. I'm surprised that the president hasn't given, a series of extended interviews. Of course, the interviews tend to be really late at night anyway. But if the president or major political figures were to give extended interviews to some of the opposition, right? I don't like to call them opposition television networks, but to at least reach out so as to create some sort of a dialogue, something interesting might come out of it. It may end up backfiring and further incriminating and creating more animosity, but nevertheless, they can only be judged based on the kind of work that the elected officials are doing. They have to realize that for instance, the can you imagine if none of the Obama administration officials ever spoke to Fox News or ensured that Fox News didn't have a representative that accompanied the president during his travels when he goes on a trip of some sort? So I think the polarization is sort of is the responsibility of both sides, and being able to deal with the criticism. I don't think the Muslim Brotherhood had an opportunity to make the psychic shift from being sort of the heroic opposition, both in their mindsets and the mindsets of the Egyptian public at large, being sort of the heroic opposition that has been persevering for 80 years and persecuted extensively, to being both in power and subject to criticism. I mean, it is a very, very difficult psychic shift. So I think it's an element of surprise, but I wouldn't say that it is animosity. If it is animosity, or if it's perceived as animosity, then I think it's a misjudgment on the part of the presidency.
انا ما اعرفش هيكل قال ايه بالظبط، لكن
We don't listen to it.
I like it, but of course. لو الرئيس كان قال كده اعتقد انه يعني he doesn't get it. الاعلام هيفضل كده، وزي ما قلت في حالة انفلات اعلامي اصلاحها مستحيل، فلازم يتعود على ان في اعلام متربص طول الوقت، زي ما في بالظبط في اعلام موالي طول الوقت. فدي الرياليتي اللي موجودة عنده. صحيفة وتلفزيون الجماعة هيقولوا كل حاجة جميلة والدنيا ممتازة، وفي إعلام خاص ليه مصالح مختلفة، مصالح تتضاد أو تتعارض مع مصالح مصر كما يكون حسب ما هم شايفين، وهيفضل طول عمره متربص ليه. فلازم يبقى واعي ومفيش وسيلة لتغيير الحاجات دي، ولو اختار يبقى في معركة مع الإعلام للأسف نتيجتها خسارة للسياسيين. عمر ما الإعلام هيخسر للأسف.
دكتور صفيد.
أولا بشكر إنجليش ولا عربي؟
It's your choice.
طيب. بالحقيقة بشكر المتحدثين الأول، بشكر طبعا محمد الشناوي وأمين اللي هم أنا يعني حضروا أنا جاي الحقيقة وكل تركيزي على عاوز أعرف تقييم الإعلام، وطبعا بانل سوبر إن يعني صحفية بتكتب بالإنجليزي في مصر، وصحفي بيكتب بالعربي من واشنطن، وأكاديمي باحث في الوسط. فأنا كنت عاوز أسمع التوصيف، لأن طبعا مفيش حد فينا أعتقد إنه راضي عن حالة الإعلام. لكن what is new زي ما مبارك قال للأمير سلطان لما قال له أنت صحيح هتوري سيدنا، قال له أنا مجنون أو الرسل خرابة. فإذا كانت مصر خرابة في نظر الحاكم المعزول المخلوع، فطبعا الصحافة مش هتكون جنة الله. واضح ان الصحافة خرابة برضه، وانا يعني شاكر ليكم كلكم انكم توسطوا. يعني لينا في دفاعها، لان انتوا الثلاثة كنتوا في قفص اتهام وما زلتوا طبعا. لينا حطت كل الذنب على الحكومة الحالية او الرجيم الحالي، ان هو هيقيد حرية المحركة والكلام والدستور والكلام القبيل. عادل طبعا يعني كتر خيرك انت اعترفت ان المهنة تعليميا من ناحية التعليم والتدريب والنقابة وكده يعني فيها كارثة محققة يعني. وطبعا اشكر الاخ محمد الشاوي اول مرة اشوفه، لان انت الحقيقه كان عندك الشجاعه ان انت تقول ان في انفلات اعلامي. هو الحقيقه مش انفلات، يمكن اكتر، اذا كان في كلمه اكتر عندك اسفاف، يمكن انحدار، يمكن انحطاط اعلامي. يعني بعض خطاب بذيء، خطاب يعني وصل الى مراحل، فدي هتوصلني وطبعا انك انت معترف ان مصداقيه الخبر حتى اصبح سسبكت. فأنا سؤالي لكم أنتوا الثلاثة accountability، لأن مفيش، وعادل أخذها، أنا كنت كتبتها وبعدين سمعتها منك تاني. أنا كنت كتبتها عشان تبقى سؤال، لكن أنت ذكرتها قلت يعني anywhere in the world there are no rights without responsibilities. فيعني what is the responsibility of the profession إذا كانت profession؟ يعني أنت بتقولي فيه عمال مطابع دلوقتي، يعني ممكن يبقى نقيب بعد رشوان يبقى عامل مطبعه مثلا، هو انك تبقى صحفيين، ده عمليه مؤلمه جدا. ف how to do the accountability؟ يعني سيبكم ان الحكومه فاسده، الحكومه فجره، الحكومه مستبده، لكن the profession is a profession. You know, how to bring accountability to this profession, to be actually a standard, يعني to lead the Arab world, to lead the Muslim world, to lead the Middle East, يعني to be يعني something I would be honored that I'm saying, you know, look at the Egyptian newspaper مثلا الأهرام في عصر هيكل.
يعني I find it hard to talk about accountability also independently from the general political context. And in my talk, I didn't just charge the ruling regime or previous ruling regimes of contaminating the context of media freedoms in general. In fact, I spoke about the problem of media concentration in the private sector, using in many ways media as political tools more than you know, using them as a way to start strong media organizations. So the blame is for everyone and not just the government. But what I'm saying is that if we want to talk about accountability, I need to have a larger context of media freedoms in which these organizations can operate freely and hence have their own measures. Because what's happening now, particularly in private media organizations and not just state media organizations, that you find an internalization of the dictatorship under which these organizations have been operating and under which these organizations have been resisting. So what happens, for example, is that in a media organization, in a private media organization that is very well established, you find very good caliber that happen to be young, for example, and who has a lot of potentials, but chances are this caliber is never going to advance just because the more traditional older leadership is in control of the landscape within these organizations. So what happens is that you are internalizing the very habits and the very working culture of the dictatorship under which you're operating. So I find it hard to talk about just reforming the sector from within if the overall context remains contaminated.
Well, this is a chicken and egg. يعني, for instance, I know, suppose a dictatorship occurs in Masr اليوم. Okay? Does that make me, as a writer, use profanity? What is that to do with profanity? What is that to do with lies and lack of integrity in reporting or apologizing about reporting a lie? What is that to do with it?
Well, precisely because it's the editor who most of the time managed to do that, and this editor, because he is God on earth in the context of this newspaper, and there's no accountability measures for this editor, that you will find him do similar things. But again, you know, this whole context is a product of the very regime under which it's operating. So I find it hard. I mean, for me, it's not an egg or a chicken. You have to reform the overall context, and then from there you can start filtering what kind of media practice you have. I don't know if my co-panelists think differently.
And I'm actually going to talk about something slightly different, but I think to correct me if I'm wrong in interpreting what you're saying. You're saying that the power structure, whether it's the power structure inside the institution, in the newspaper, or in the larger sort of company that publishes, or even higher within the sort of the state as a stratus, that determines in many instances what the product looks like, as opposed to the work of the individual journalist. And that is precisely why under Mubarak, for as many years as it's been, there were excellent journalists that either never saw their material come out, or when it came out very piecemeal, and many of them were punished for the work that they do. So, one, I think maybe that's, that helps clarify a little bit, that it's neither a chicken nor an egg, but rather it is the entire poultry farm that has a problem, or the owner of the poultry farm is the person that needs to be held accountable. Mohamed is going to mention I cheated. I saw what he's going to say. So I have the benefit of not repeating what he's going to say. I'm going to talk about three different, two major trends to keep in context, because Egypt doesn't exist in a vacuum. Egypt is part of a community of nations, and there are trends occurring within media and journalism as sectors internationally that Egypt is not an exception to. The first is a growing deprofessionalization of journalism. There are both, here in the United States and in Egypt and around the world, the percentage of reporting that is done by non-professional journalists. By professional, I don't mean people who have been trained or received any formal education in journalism or reporting, but in addition to that, also people who are not in any way members of professional syndicates or labor groups or that are they're basically freelancers or stringers or just ordinary people who happen to be in the right place at the right time. There's all this talk about citizen journalists, and with the dwindling budgets of media institutions around the world, this is not just in Egypt, but around the world, there's a tendency to rely on people who are in the right place at the right time. So God forbid if something were to happen outside of this intersection, of course, Dr. Kebaish will be in the right place at the right time to save the day. But if we're here and we have our cameras, we can document it and send it to whatever network. We become witnesses, we become reporters by virtue of our proximity to the news. And so there's a growing deprofessionalization and there's a growing acceptance of this deprofessionalization. The profession sometimes reacts adversely and says, no, there are standards, there are rules, there are regulations, there are ways of doing things. But for the most part, there is a growing deprofessionalization. And it's happening in Egypt as well at a very, very fast pace. And so sometimes it's very difficult to tell not just who is a journalist and who isn't, or who's reporting and who isn't, because they are all called Sahafi or non-Sahafi, but it does become in many instances a legal designation. There's a legal designation. If you are practicing journalist, if you're a card-carrying member of a syndicate or a professional organization, then you are subject to specific rules and regulations. But in many instances, reporting happens outside of that framework, and will continue to do so. There's no way of withholding that. What we called bloggers 5 years ago are going to be tweeters, are tweeters now, and there could be other ways of thinking about how information and news is disseminated. So it's basically old models that are not working with a new system that's growing and expanding very, very rapidly. So this deprofessionalization goes counter to everything that we've said so far. And it is an international trend, and it's happening, at a local level. I'm not gonna ask Lina how many members of her team at Egypt Independent are quote-unquote journalists or reporters by the definition, or are members of the syndicate. And I'm not going to speculate. So maybe if she wants to volunteer that information, she can tell us. But I think that the growing number of reporters, whether it's in Yom or others, or these various publications, are basically freelancers in every sense of the word and have no interest in becoming anything but freelancers. And so this deprofessionalization will continue to exist. The second point is the rise of the partisan press. So if we think that Egypt's media is being polarized because it's Egypt and the political situation is complicated, and we have two competing political forces, and the spectrum is becoming much more sort of polarized, that's not entirely true. It's not exceptional to Egypt. There is definitely a rise in the partisan press over the last 20 years, and it's been rising quite significantly. You look at the media options at our disposal here in the United States since, at least 9/11, or actually to be more precise, since the rise of right-wing talk radio in the late 1980s and the arrival of Fox News in the mid-1990s. It's changed the entire media landscape. Now, MSNBC is, of course, left-leaning or more liberal or something along those lines. But you can read newspapers in this country, and of course, keep in mind that as far as media education goes and journalism education, this country's journalism schools invented the term objectivity. It was in the early 1920s that the notion of objectivity as a standard for journalists became part and parcel of the practice in this country. And journalists had to abide by impartiality and be neutral and distance themselves from the story and write from a different perspective. Today, I don't know a single journalism school in this country that doesn't critique the notion of objectivity as a problem in journalism.
But Egyptian journalism has been very respectable in the 1930s, 40s. يعني التابعي لأحمد بهاء الدين هيكل
Sure.
يعني we don't need the Americans to learn from the Americans.
No,
We have already good schools already.
Well, but what I'm saying is that what is happening to Egypt is a symptom of what is happening internationally around the world. That there is a rise of the partisan press. If you look at, let's say, you walk into any newsstand in the UK, and you'll find that every single newspaper has a very particular political line, and it's considered generally acceptable. The key is to be able to tell the facts and then provide the context that you see fit. So if you read an article in The Guardian or read it in The Times or read it in The Independent, you know that the context is going to be different, but the factuality and the accuracy is the standard that everybody is held by. So if you pick up a copy of Shuru or pick up a copy of Fajr or Tahrir or Hizb al-Hurriya wal-Adalah, you should expect that at least the base of the fact that the story happened, something happened, that's the standard. And beyond that, there is room for interpretation and presentation. And that's where I think things become problematic. How do you turn back the hands of time? Today, literally around the world, the notion of objectivity is kind of crumbling. And it's political interests and economic interests that are determining how news is told and how news is reported. Journalism schools used to fight back, but today they essentially don't. I mean, I teach Georgia. I don't teach journalism specifically, but almost every journalism school that I've either given a lecture at or that I'm familiar with, the term objectivity is presented initially in the beginning of the semester and then deconstructed immediately. And so the term, it's funny because in the
ethics, the word ethics.
Ethics are taught. You can study ethics, but ethics is a different discussion entirely, because it typically raises the issue of social responsibility. And social responsibility is usually focusing on the public interest. What is in the public interest? It's in the public interest to ensure that this intersection works and functions properly so that nobody gets into an accident. So if somebody writes an article about how the timing of the traffic doesn't work, that's in the public interest. Or that the sewer, the municipal issues, and so these are, a lot of things can fall under public interest. But still, the issue of objectivity is the key factor that distinguishes between perspective on an issue that could be politicized or another perspective that also might be politicized. So and it really grew out, at least in this country, it grew out of the idea that you've got Republicans and you've got Democrats. And there was a time in this country where newspapers were aligned. There was something called the Tallahassee Democrat or the Albany Republican. I mean, newspapers belonged to parties. And when they started reaching across the political aisle, they decided that they needed to become objective. You need to sell the newspaper to non-party members. In the same way that Hizb al-Hurriya wal-Adalah's newspaper needs to be sold to non-party members as well. So you have to cross that political aisle. But once that happens, you have to change the way in which you present news. And that's when objectivity became important. But in the grand scheme of things, today there's further partisanship in almost all media around the world. All you have to do is switch between the channels and satellite television from the Arab world, Jazeera, Al Arabiya, etc., Manar, blah, blah, blah. I mean, you know the political line of everything. And this is not peculiar. It's not strange, and it's a sign of a trend that's happening internationally. So as we think of solutions for Egypt, we have to keep in mind that this is happening.
I will عن النقابة، الموضوع دخول غير الصحفيين كان أيام إبراهيم نافع ووقف بقاله سنة أو سنتين، فلسه أعتقد في إصلاح في الحتة دي. موضوع المحاسبة أعتقد الطبيعي في عالم مثالي المشاهد والقارئ هو المحاسب الأول، هو اللي بيروح يدفع جنيه أو دولار يجيب بيه جورنال. فأنا لو الجنيه بالنسبة لي مهم هروح أبص أنهي جورنال اللي أجيبه، ومعايا بالظبط في البيت معايا ريموت كنترول بعمل كده، أروح مصر 25 والناحية الثانية أروح على CBC أو أي حاجة تانية. فالمفروض القارئ والمشاهد هو الحكم، هو اللي يقدر يخلي محطة أو جورنال يفلس بحكم ان هو ما فيش ديماند عليه. لكن طبعا في دور مال زي ما هم اتكلموا عادل ولينا ليه بالتين. لكن في على الاقل فيما يتعلق بالسب والكذب، اعتقد القضاء هو الاهم هنا، اصلاح القضاء وسرعه البت في القضايا. انك تترك جهه صحفيه تتهم حد زورا او تريبورت حاجه خطره على شخص او على جماعه او على حزب او على جهه، واروح ابلغ في المحكمه ومفيش رد. يعني لو في حكم بيطلع في اسبوعين ثلاثه، ولو في زي ما في بريطانيا مثلا بيحصل فيها غرامات كبيره على ملك الصحيفه او الجهه التحريريه، ممكن يبقى فيه ردع، لكن ده مش موجود في مصر. فانت بتتكلم على مجتمع في حاله رديئه جدا، فالاعلام مش استثناء. وما اعتقدش ان في وسيله لخلق مصداقيه في الاعلام المصري غير القارئ والقضاء، يعني رول اوف لو والمشاهد والقارئ. لكن غير كده مثاليه مش موجوده، زي ما عادل اضاف ان العالم كله اعلام موجه النهارده، سواء حزبي او سياسي او
يعني في النقابه مفيش حاجه اسمها كوميتي فور ايثكس كوميتي ده اي
في، بس زيها زي القضاء في مصر بتاخد سنين.
دكتور امين.
I would like to thank the panelists and Mohammed for participating in this event, and thanks first Dr. Adel. He's opened his house and his business as a new place for us in any time. Thank you. My question is regarding to the government media, TV and the newspaper. Is any study how to reform it, how to change it to be effective? Even the Muslim Brotherhood cannot use it now to really stand against the private media. Was the idea before Adel, when he had Masriya TV, is we discuss how we can have this as a public TV, similar to public TV here. And that will be a good idea if we have one channel or two in Egypt working toward that. Is any reform study or somebody looking at to introduce it to the new Majlis Nawab in the future, inshallah?
Well, yes, there have been studies. I don't know what's happening with any of the. I don't know if Majlis Shura is reviewing anything of that sort, or Majlis Nawab, or Majlis Wazara. I don't really know if there's something on the table right now. But this is something that's been studied for at least the last 10 years. Even under the Mubarak era, there was discussion, but they came across the same problems that Mohammed pointed out, which is basically a very, very intransigent institution that has a lot of connections. It employs a lot of people. So whatever reform has to absorb these people into sort of new jobs in some way. And of course, you would have to force a lot of people into retirement who don't have any functional skills, either technical or professional. And that poses a problem as well. So how do you turn this big sort of monster into a lean, like how would feel أرنب يعني. You want to make it efficient, and it's just not happening yet. And so there were extensive discussions with a lot, and actually the Egyptian government brought a lot of top consultants and reviewed models compared to the BBC, for instance, which we talked about, and how to turn Egyptian state broadcasting into the equivalent of a public media institution, and a lot of money was paid.
This government or Mubarak?
Previous government, I don't know what this government has done so far. And do you know?
How about the master's degrees, PhDs?
There are studies, of course, there are studies. And Egypt is not the first example. Like the Eastern European countries have, at least 15, 20 years worth of experience in reforming state media institutions that were under, either the Communist Party or sort of aligned to the Soviet bloc in some way, and how to transform. And in many cases, it was the creation of a very lean and very sort of focused public media sector, and alongside that, the privatization of almost all other facilities. So, for instance, the creative side of these, or of this government sector, was effectively sold. In many cases, it was sold to the private sector, and it was developed and turned into, and in some cases, very burgeoning media organizations. But so yeah, there are models. The question is there political will, first of all,
Sure.
and can it be done given the size and the magnitude of what's happening?
أنا راديكال جدا. المؤسسات الإعلامية الحكومية في مصر غارقة في الفساد، فساد أكثر من عشرات السنين، متراكم جدا. الأهرام الصحيفة الأهم والأقدم في الشرق الأوسط، 75% من الصحفيين اللي عايشين فيها أولاد صحفيين سابقين في المؤسسة. فإمبوسبل إنك تصلح مؤسسة بهذا الكم من الفساد. المؤسسات دي بتخسر من بقالها 30 سنة على الأقل، بتكلف ميزانية الدولة اللي احنا بنشحت مساعدات من العالم كله وما بنعملش حاجة تانية، وبياخدوا مزايا مادية غير عادية. الصحفيين اللي واخدين أجازات وبيشتغلوا في صحف منافسة، مصر اليوم أو الشروق، بيروحوا آخر السنة يتخانقوا وبياخدوا اسمها ايه اخر السنه؟ البونص بتاعت السنه، المكافآت التي لا ترتبط بالربح. يعني الاهرام والاخبار والجمهوريه بيدوا مكافآت سنويه اكتر من مرتب اي صحفي في السنه، يعني ايكويفالنت اكتر من مرتب الشهر كل مره، يعني بتاخد مرتب كومباين اكتر من مرتبك طول السنه مكافاه. اشتغلت ما اشتغلتش، اشتغلت في مؤسسه اخرى بتاخد بالدولار او ما بتاخدش. انا اسف، انسوا ان يبقى في حاجه اسمها اصلاح او اعاده هيكله الاعلام المصري. انا رحت المؤسسات دي ورحت مؤسسات التلفزيون كذا مره، ما ينفعش تصلح المؤسسات دي، ما ينفعش، لا بي سي ولا بي اس، فورجيت، ما تضييع وقت. مؤسسات بتخسر ملايين الدولارات كل سنه من ميزانيه الدوله على عجز، وفي الاخر ناس لوبي جامد جدا مش عايزين اي تغيير يحصل لان هم كلهم هيتضرروا. ممكن الاخوان دلوقتي جابوا ناس متعاطفين معاهم في القيادات، لكن مش هتتغير في المؤسسه، هي مفيش حل غير انك تلغي كل دول وتعيد. لو عايز يبقى في حاجه زي بي سي بنتكلم few of them I will rehire them with a new contract and new term. لكن المؤسسات دي عندها ريل استيت في مصر very rich if you liquidate it، يعني لو بعت مؤسساتهم ومطابعهم ومصانع الورق تحل ازمه الديون اللي في مصر.
I'll go to Mohammed, but I have a follow-up. I don't know if media people like yourselves can start rely on themselves, not on the government, to fix the media. Yesterday I got an email from the State Department offering $600,000 as a grant for any group or an institution that would help democracy in the Middle East. So, I mean, I never heard about an institution that applied from Egypt to get such a grant. I mean, we have to think out of the box in this term. Two, out of my own experience, I can tell there is no political will to even consider any ideas to fix the problem. Whether under the generals, it was like 3 months after the revolution, I sent a package to the generals, to Assam Sharaf, to the Minister of Information, and to 2 independent channels, and 2 years later I never heard a single word. Then, what's her name? No. Akinam Sharawi came and we had dinner at the embassy with her, and I gave her a couple of pages on how to fix the formal media, especially the radio and television in Egypt. And she introduced me to a guy that was assigned to fix the media within the presidential institution. And when I gave it to him, he said, "Oh, that's great." I said, "What's your background?" He said, "I am a physician." So that tells you. And after reading what I gave him, he said, "This is great, but I cannot promise you anything." I didn't ask for anything, but that's the answer. 3, yesterday there was a rumor in Egypt that اتحاد الإذاعة والتلفزيون will be sold. And the spokesperson for the government, Ambassador Adel Al-Hadidi, said that's not true, and if we decided to do that, it would be a decision for the parliament to take. So maybe this is in the making. تفضل.
يعني أولا أشكركم جميعا، الحقيقة ندوة ممتازة جدا. نتفق جميعا على أن هناك حالة من الفوضى أو الانفلات أو الانحدار أو كما قال الدكتور صفي التردي الإعلامي في البلد. يعني ما نراه الآن سواء على الصحافة أو في التلفزيون، القنوات التلفزيونية بصفة خاصة، يعني أعتقد أنه ليس موجودا في أي مكان في العالم. إذا كنا نتحدث عن الحرية فإحنا هنا في بلد الحريات لا نرى هذا الشكل أو هذه الفورمات اللي بنشوفها على التلفزيون دلوقتي. عندنا قنوات خاصة وتصورنا أن هذه القنوات الخاصة ستأتي بالحرية، ولكن تحولت الحرية إلى نوع من الشتائم والسباب والصراخ العالي يعني حتى هنا اكثر القنوات اللي هي محافظه وهي قناه فوكس نيوز ما بنشوفش فيها الفورمات الحقيقه دي. فهناك في مسكونسبشن عن حريه الاعلام او عن الحريه بشكل عام. كذلك الحال بالنسبه للصحافه. يعني انا هضرب مثلا باليوم السابع مثلا، انا اجي كل يوم اشوف الصحافه المصريه على الاونلاين، الاقي اليوم السابع 80% من الاخبار اللي بيحطوها غلط او كاذبه او بيعتذروا او ما يعتذروش بعد كده، او يجي مثلا في حاجه مهمه جدا وهي المسليدنج في تحرير الخبر. يعني انا مثلا اقول لك ايه، شاب قبل قليل حريق في دكان مثلا او في محل تجاري، مش عارف، انا اتصور ان البلد اتحرقت في الزقازيق مثلا في المنصوره او في شبرا، وبعدين حاطين لي صوره دكان مولع نار وكأن البلد بتتحرق. انا لو انسان بسيط مش هقرا التفاصيل، هتصور خلاص مصر ولعت. لو دخلت بلاقي سطر او سطر ونص، شاب قليل وسنوافيكم بمزيد من التفاصيل بعد قليل، وصوره ارشيفيه تحت الصوره. هذه ليست صوره الخبر. فده مسليدنج رهيب الحقيقه، بشوف في مواقع كثيره جدا، ويعني غلط من الناحيه الاعلاميه بلا شك. يعني ده مجرد نموذج، يعني بضربه اليوم السابع الحقيقه تقع في اخطاء كثيره جدا. بالنسبه للتلفزيون، انا دلوقتي شايف، يعني انا مش في حاجه ان انا كل توك شو او ما تسمى بالتوك شوز كل واحد قاعد ساعتين يكلمني، يعني تو تراي تو وين هارتس اند مايندز زي ما بيقولوا، او يلعب في مخي وانا اقعد سنه، مع احترامي للجميع، سواء ابراهيم عيسى او مش عارف عمرو اديب او فلان او وائل براشي او فلان،
والشيوخ الناحيه الثانيه كمان،
والشيوخ من الناحيه الثانيه. فانا هناك حاله، اتفقنا هناك حاله من الفوضى والاستقطاب السياسي، واضيف اليها الاستقطاب الديني، وهو ما اخطر بكثير من الاستقطاب السياسي، لانه الحقيقه بيلعب بامخاخ البسطاء، وده بيولع البلد يعني. فأنا كمشاهد أو كمواطن أنا مش عايز أشوف ده. أنا الحقيقة يعني عشان to make it short، يعني ليا 3 أسئلة ليكم أنتوا 3. لا سريعا هم متعلقين بالحكاية دي. الأستاذة لينا، هل الناشونال ميديا كونسل اللي ذكرتيه، هل ده ممكن يعالج هذه المشكلة وممكن يحط ايثيك كودز مثلا للفورمات اللي يشتغل بيها؟ السؤال للدكتور عادل اسكندر، الجزيرة، انت ليك كتاب عن الجزيرة وعن كيف ان الجزيرة تغيرت حكومات وتغير الجورناليزم او الصحافة بصفة عامة يعني. فالجزيرة مثلا كانت ايام الثورة الناس رفعوا شعار الجزيرة في ميدان التحرير، وفي الموجات الأخيرة اللي قبل شهور حرقوا مكتب الجزيرة في القاهرة. فهل يعني كيف ترى الجزيرة كمنفذ إعلامي في العالم العربي، وهل هي موضوعية أم غير موضوعية، ومن يمولها وهكذا؟ الأستاذ محمد المنشاوي، مع احترامي طبعا ليك ولتحاليلك يعني، وأنا من المعجبين بك يعني، بس في نقطة بالنسبة للإعلام الحكومي والإعلام الخاص. الإعلام الحكومي من الصعب جدا جدا وحتى حرام إنك ترفد الناس دي كلها اللي بتشتغل. أنا بدأت في الإعلام المصري في القاهرة، هناك تسايب، هناك فساد، هناك سواء في المؤسسات الصحفية أو في الإعلام، في الإذاعة والتلفزيون. يعني ليس هناك، إحنا ما دخلنا الإذاعة، بدأت في الإذاعة زمان، كان في إعلانات بتنزل في الأهرام مثلا، وبيتقدم إليها الخريجين بتوع السنة دي وبيدخلوا بعين بيصفوهم من 1500 واحد، بيصفوا على 40 مثلا بين مذيع ومحرر ومترجم، وبعدين بتاخد دورات تدريبية عامة ودورات تدريبية متخصصة وهكذا. ما فيش الكلام ده، أصبح دلوقتي في محسوبية وفي فساد، وزي بتقول ورشوة وبالفلوس، أحيانا كمال الشاذلي أحيانا في كل القطاعات. زي ما في الأهرام أولاد الصحفيين نفس الحكاية، معارف في شباب ممتازين جدا خارج الإعلام لا يستطيعوا أن يلتحقوا بالإعلام، سواء صحافة أو تلفزيون أو إذاعة. فما هو الحل؟ يعني ما ينفعش إنك ترفد الناس دي. فهو اللي ممكن يكون في ريفورم، إصلاح أو ري أورجانيزيشن، إعادة هيكلة أو إعادة تنظيم.